Mr. President, tomorrow will mark 1 year since the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, China, and Iran reached an agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining or developing a nuclear weapon. This afternoon, I intend to review where we are today, 1 year after the deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. And I'm grateful for a number of my colleagues who will come to the floor as well today or who are submitting statements for the record, reviewing where we are 1 year later. As I said a year ago, roughly, in September, when I ultimately decided, after long and thorough and detailed consideration, to support the agreement, those of us determined to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran have a real and enduring and ongoing responsibility to undertake consistent and clear-eyed assessments of how this agreement fares, not just over the course of its first year, but over the many years to come. In short, in my assessment, so far, this deal has done what it intended to do. Because of aggressive enforcement of the terms of the agreement, the JCPOA has cut off Iran's most likely short-term uranium and plutonium pathways to building a nuclear weapon. The time it would take for Iran to break out, to assemble enough fissile material for one nuclear weapon, has extended significantly, from just 2 to 3 months to well over a year. The international community, in turn, has upheld its commitments under the deal, providing Iran with relief from nuclear-related sanctions. But more importantly, the agreement has given the IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, unprecedented searching access to oversee all of Iran's nuclear activities with intrusive inspections and round-the-clock remote monitoring. I'm going to review for a few more minutes all the different ways that I and some of my colleagues have worked to ensure effective enforcement of this agreement. First, as to the IAEA inspections I just mentioned, at my urging, the Senate's State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee provided nearly $95 million in funding for the IAEA, a $5 million increase over the level requested by President Obama. And on top of giving the IAEA greater resources, this increase, I believe, sends a strong signal to Iran and our international partners that we intend to enforce the JCPOA, that we intend to encourage voluntary contributions by our international partners to strengthen the agency and sustain its ability to take advantage of the unique opportunities under this agreement for a searching and continuous insight into Iran's nuclear activity. Advocating for additional U.S. support for the IAEA is just one of the steps my colleagues and I have taken over the past year to ensure the nuclear agreement is implemented effectively and enforced strictly. In a series of 15 floor speeches since December, during which I've been joined by nearly a dozen members of my caucus, I've sought to keep this agreement on our radar to ensure that Congress is effectively monitoring it and that we are relentlessly enforcing its terms. But holding Iran accountable doesn't just mean enforcing the JCPOA. It also means pushing back on that regime's bad behavior across the Middle East, behavior that falls outside the scope of the nuclear agreement. That's why I've called for the Obama administration to strengthen its efforts to interdict Iranian arms shipments to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and, like a police department after a successful drug bust, to then publicize that those interdictions have occurred and the weapons that they've seized, demonstrating to the American people and our partners in the Middle East the full scope of Iran's destabilizing activities and our intention to keep cracking down on those activities, which is crucial to building a broad coalition that will sustainably counter Iranian aggression. That's why I've also worked with my colleagues to provide $117 million this year for the U.S. Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, which enforces American sanctions against bad actors, including enforcing some of the very sanctions that crippled Iran's economy and forced it to the negotiating table in the first place. That funding represents a significant increase, $17 million since 2013, and I'm fighting for an additional $6 million this next fiscal year. I've also held discussions with foreign leaders from Israel to Saudi Arabia, India, Qatar, Turkey, and Russia about how we can work together to sustainably counter Iranian aggression. And I've called on the administration to levy new sanctions against an entity affiliated with Iran's hardline Revolutionary Guard Corps known as Mahan Air, and I will make the same demand of the next administration. I've worked to impose penalties on Iran for its dangerous and provocative behavior, which means taking action against their destabilizing support for the murderous Assad regime in Syria and their promotion of terrorism throughout the Middle East. Iran's ongoing illegal ballistic missile tests, and the regime's human rights abuses, from its execution of juveniles to its detention of journalists and Iranian-American citizens. I've also joined my colleague Senator Graham in leading a letter to President Obama calling upon the administration to conclude a strengthened 10-year MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, on defense priorities with our vital ally, Israel. I am determined to continue these efforts in the months and years to come. We cannot avert our eyes from Iran's destructive behavior, even as we review what progress has been made in the year since the JCPOA. Mr. President, if we are to ensure that that agreement remains intact, if we are to succeed in our task of preventing Iran from developing or obtaining a nuclear weapon, Congress must play an active role. If the agreement succeeds, we should recognize those successes. If Iran falls short of the terms of the agreement, we need to make certain the international community reacts swiftly to bring Iran back into compliance. Regardless of whether my colleagues opposed or supported this agreement a year ago, regardless of where one stood then, we all have an interest today in working together to ensure we prevent Iran from ever being able to develop a nuclear weapon. We have a responsibility then to review Iran's actions and hold them accountable through aggressive enforcement of the deal, pushing back on their bad behavior, and maintaining a credible conventional deterrent. As my colleagues' comments later today will make clear, in addition to holding Iran to the terms of the nuclear deal, we have to push back against their dangerous non-nuclear bad behavior. As I've mentioned, the ballistic missile tests, human rights violations, and support for terrorism. I know my colleagues and I remain committed to overseeing strict enforcement of the nuclear agreement with Iran and protecting the security of our allies and partners in the Middle East, especially our vital ally, Israel. And I also know we remain committed to showing that international engagement and multilateral diplomacy can be effective, even with rogue regimes like Iran. These commitments are why my colleagues and I are on the floor this afternoon and evening. These commitments will continue tomorrow as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, on which I serve, holds a hearing that will review closely where we are 1 year since the JCPOA. I want to thank Chairman Corker and Ranking Member Cardin for regularly holding hearings to assess the nuclear deal and for convening tomorrow's hearing, which I look forward to attending. Mr. President, our commitment to overseeing the implementation of this important agreement can and must continue for its entire duration. Even if another crisis emerges, we must remain vigilant and push for the most aggressive enforcement of this deal and not be distracted by developments in other parts of the world. That is my commitment for as long as I have the honor of representing the people of Delaware in the Senate. Now, I'm grateful to some of my colleagues who will join me on the floor later here today, Senator Carper, Senator Peters, Senator Blumenthal, but I'd like to also ask at this time for unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the senior senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Casey. I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator Casey, for his steadfast efforts to support our vital ally, Israel, and ensure swift multilateral consequences for JCPOA violations.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me, in closing, say this, that we, this body, this Congress, the people of this country, must make a clear distinction between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. The Iranian regime deserves scrutiny, condemnation, and opposition for a decades-long pattern of human rights abuses, support for terrorism, bad behavior. But the Iranian people deserve our support in their fight for freedom, democracy, and human rights. And with that, Mr. President, I'm hopeful we will hear soon from my good friend and fellow Delawarean, the senior senator from our state of neighbors, who's been a leader in my state for decades. And I know later this evening we will also hear on these important topics from Senators Peter and Blumenthal as well. I am grateful to all of my colleagues who have joined me in colloquies and statements on the floor on this important topic in the past, and I just hope that we can, in a sustainable and bipartisan way, insist on effective and rigorous enforcement of this deal throughout its entire term.
I want to thank Senator Coons, my colleague from Delaware, for organizing a bit of a floor colloquy of members to take place this afternoon to discuss the one-year anniversary of something that we call the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal that was signed literally a year ago tomorrow by 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, along with Iran. At the time, a year ago, there were a lot of skeptics as to whether or not Iran would keep its part of the bargain and not go forward with developing nuclear weapons. We heard arguments that they would evade inspection in Iran, that they would never live up to their obligations under the agreement that we signed a year ago tomorrow. We heard that they couldn't be trusted. We heard that they would not keep their word. We heard any number of accusations and speculation. We heard that the people of Iran wished death upon America and wished to continue the antagonistic relationship with the U.S., dominated U.S.-Iran relations after the Iranian Revolution. I just want to say, a year later, I believe there's a good reason to believe that the critics have been proved wrong when Iran took those irreversible steps to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, steps that were certified by the nuclear watchdogs at the International Atomic Energy Agency. For example, international inspectors certified that Iran had reduced its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98%, 98%, and that the remaining enriched uranium is only enriched to levels consistent with the peaceful energy uses. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency also certified that the nearly 15,000 centrifuges for enriching uranium have been dismantled, leaving Iran with only its least sophisticated centrifuges that can be used solely for peaceful purposes. And the inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency have certified that the special heavy water reactor that could produce the kind of plutonium needed for a nuclear bomb will produce no more. Inspectors saw firsthand that the core of that reactor had been filled with concrete, rendering it incapable of ever producing plutonium again. And inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency continue to assess that Iran is keeping up with its commitments in the nuclear agreement. I've never been to Iran. Hope to go someday. But a place I have been to is Southeast Asia. I served 3 years in a war in that part of the world with a country with whom we were at war, in some cases almost a proxy war, but at war for many years, the Vietnam War. The names of 55,000 men and women on a granite wall about 2 miles from where we're standing here today, close to the Lincoln Memorial, 55+ thousand men and women who died in that war. 55,000. When the war was over, war was winding down, my active duty tour with the United States Navy as a naval flight officer came to an end. And I resigned from my regular commission, assumed a reserve commission, and continued to fly with the Navy as a P-3 aircraft mission commander in Naval Reserve for another 18 years. The month after I retired from the Navy as a captain, I was a member of the House of Representatives. I led a trade delegation, not a trade delegation, but a delegation of 6 of us, all Vietnam veterans, members of the U.S. House of Representatives, back to Vietnam in August of 1991. We went at a time when, even though we were not at war with Iran, there was still great animosity between our two countries. Some of that spurred by the fact that thousands of Americans, MIAs, we never found out what happened to them. They disappeared, some cases almost without a trace. And we had very little cooperation from Vietnam to try to find out the truth of their demise. There's a lot of speculation that they're being held up as POWs in Iran, not in Iran, but in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Laos. And there were actually photographs of people alleged to be our MIAs that were being held in captivity. We didn't know where, but the assertion was in Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos. It turned out during our congressional delegation trip there in August of '91, turned out that the pictures that were shown on the cover of Newsweek and Time magazine and front pages of newspapers all over this country were not Americans, they were Soviet nationals. And it was a really an effort by people in Cambodia, bad people, to try to extort money apparently from the families of the MIAs, the American MIAs who never came home. And that the people in those pictures are actually Soviet nationals, not missing Americans. During the midst of all this back and forth about the missing MIAs from America, from that war, 6 of us participated in a congressional delegation. We went to Vietnam. We met with the new leader of Vietnam, a fellow named Damoy. He just became the leader, August 91, of the Communist Party, making him the top leader of Vietnam. And we presented to him from the Bush administration, George Herbert Walker Bush administration, a roadmap to normalized relations. And this was a deal. Vietnam, if you will open up your archives, open up your war museums, allow us to explore, excavate crash sites, have free movement around your country to see what if Americans are spotted or people believe the Americans are spotted. If you will do all those things, we will reciprocate. We will move toward normalized relations with your country. And there was a lot of lack of faith on sides of both countries, Vietnam and for us Vietnamese. Were fearful we'd move the goalposts, and they did. Even if they did all the things they were required to do under the roadmap to normalize relations, we'd move the goalpost and still not normalize relations. And for our part, there was concern that they'll never do those things anyway. So why should we bother? At the end of the day, we engaged with the Vietnamese, and they engaged with us. They did the things they were supposed to do. We did as well. We normalized relations about 4 years later. John Kerry, John McCain did good work in the Senate. Our delegation did, I think, good work in the House. And one administration, George Herbert Walker Bush administration, passed the baton to that of President Clinton, and normalized relations were established about 4 years later. The first U.S. ambassador to Vietnam was a member of our delegation, former POW, former Air Force pilot, Pete Peterson. Fast forward about 25 years later, a month and a half ago, President Obama was nice enough to invite me to join him on a trip back to Vietnam, with along a couple of congressmen as well. And a lot had changed in those 15 years, 25 years, a lot had changed. And today, the United States of America is Vietnam's top export market. Today, Vietnam is part of the 12-member Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership that we are endeavoring to establish and get approved here and in 11 other countries. The Vietnamese announced while we were over there a month and a half ago a $11 billion deal with the Boeing. They're going to buy 100 737 jets valued at $11.3 billion from Boeing. They announced that they were going to buy from Pratt & Whitney, big aircraft engine company, another $3 billion worth of engines to put in 63 Airbus. The president lifted the ban on arms sales to Vietnam, and a lot of other announcements were made. While we're over there, we learned that a survey of the Vietnamese people, 2 surveys done earlier this year, one indicated that the Vietnamese people, 84% of them had a favorable opinion of the U.S. today, 84%. Another survey indicated 95% of the Vietnamese people have a favorable opinion of the U.S., the highest of any nation by highest opinion, the highest regarded any nation by the Vietnamese people. Us. They like us more in Vietnam than we like us. Kind of ironic. Well, meanwhile, in Iran, Iran is also, not unlike Vietnam, a young nation. About 78 million people who live in Iran. More than half of them are under the age of 25. And they have a great affection for our country. Some of their leaders do not, but many of the people do, particularly the younger people. And they want a better life with us and a better relationship with us. They've had elections since the joint agreement was agreed to, and the elections have enabled, both in their parliament and in the Council of Experts, which elects the next supreme leader. The moderates, the reformers, made great strides in those elections earlier this year. Very encouraging results. A year later, among the other things that have happened, the Iranians have decided that they've had a hard time accessing capital to be able to purchase things. Unanimous request for one more minute, Mr. President. Just as the Vietnamese have finalized a large deal, purchase of American jets. The Iranians announced about 2 weeks ago that they'll be purchasing a number of 747 jumbo jets built by Boeing, 737s, 777s. The value of the deal is worth about $17 billion over the next 4, 5, 6 years. So I would suggest to our colleagues who said, you can't trust these guys. Well, we still have problems with what they're doing with some of their missile testing. We have problems with the support of Hezbollah and some other terrorist groups like that. But for the most part, they've kept their word on the deal, the joint deal that we signed, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And we're starting to see some commerce transact between both countries that actually inure to our bottom line to strengthen the economy of this nation. So I just want to say that is it time for us to spike the football, to say everything's fine, it's going to be fine for, no. Eyes wide open, that's important, eyes wide open. But having said that, I think most fair-minded people would say, so far so good. Let's continue to be vigilant, and hopefully a year from now, the second anniversary of the signing of this joint agreement, we'll have even better pieces of news, better news, not just for us, not just for Iran, but for the whole rest of the world.